I have a very atypical timeline, and I strongly don't recommend following this timeline. Really strongly recommend not following this timeline. And then I gave my first attempt in August. Yeah, and I got a score that I was not super happy by because I have been perfectionist most of my life. I'm like, if I'll apply, I have to have the 99th percentile at least and stuff like that. So I kept giving it again, like though my goal was to apply in round one that year in 2019. I kept giving it again and I gave it 4 times that year. Touchy is a great course. I think it's the best class I've taken at GSB for sure. And it almost doesn't feel like a class because I think there's just so much personal stuff going on.
Welcome to today's episode of Crack the MBA show. Our guest today is Abhi Arora, who is a second-year student at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Abhi holds a BCom degree from Shri College of Commerce, where she was part of the Dramatic Society, Students' Union, and SRCC Business Conclave. Pre-MBA, Abhi worked for 2 years at Kearney, 3 years at IFC, before helping start Proactive for Her, a women's health startup. At Stanford, Abhi is the co-president of Women in Management Club and Wellness Club. Abhi interned at Caraway, a digital healthcare company for college women, helping the founders launch the company. Welcome, Abhi. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much, Nupur, for doing this.
Yeah, pleasure. Abhi, to begin, can you share a fun fact about yourself?
A fun fact. I don't know how fun this would be for a lot of people, but I just came back from a 10-day silent meditation retreat in Guatemala. So
Oh, wow. That is insane. Is it one of those Vipassana things?
I did Vipassana, yes.
Oh, wow. And is that your first one? You've done more of those before.
This was my first Vipassana. I've done similar things before, but not Vipassana.
Okay. How is it reintegrating into civilization after that?
It was a bit hard because business school is like a lot of stimulus everywhere. And like we were just coming out of break. And so a lot of people want to hang out. And you also have like a lot of events suddenly. And I remember coming back and talking to my friend, and I'm like, my jaw hurts from smiling this much and talking this much. I'm not used to this. So yeah, but a great experience.
Okay. Fantastic. Amazing. Recommend? Yes, no, maybe?
Oh, so strongly recommend it.
Awesome. Okay, so just moving on a little. So, Abhi, in terms of the flow, we'll talk about some of the influences that have shaped you. We'll talk about the admissions, your admissions journey. Then we'll talk about your Stanford journey. So, we'll start with the influences. If you could share some of the winning habits you've had growing up, that have led to so many of your successes, be it cracking SRCC, then Stanford, and then also leading 2 clubs, which is highly unusual to be co-president of 2 clubs in an MBA program. So if you could just share some of your winning habits, I think that'll be really helpful for some of our early starters.
I think growing up for me, something that was extremely important was that I wanted to get out of the small town I was living. I wanted independence. I really valued anything that came with independence. And I thought that being independent means earning money. It means like just being able to have that decision making in your own power, because I'd seen my mother and seen countless women in my family like not have that kind of independence. So I think that drove me quite a bit, that I want to be independent and I will make life my own way. I'm not going to listen to anybody and just proving everybody wrong. And I think that really fueled me quite a bit. And I used to not take no for an answer. Like I still don't. But if I know I want something, like I would just go for it. Like I would make sure that something or the other thing happens, and I will just go at it. And of course, I was lucky that I had a good memory and teachers liked me because I was good at academics. But yeah, I think other than that, a lot of drive to just get out of Chandigarh, where I grew up, and be independent.
Okay, understood. And what's the first memory you have of doing that, not taking no and just going for it?
I think one of the earliest memories is when I was really young and I've never believed in religion. So was just telling my parents, like, this is something I just don't want to do. And I don't want to be going to temples. And this is not something that I agree with. And I think my parents really pushing back, but then at the same time, like just being like, no, this is my values. Like, this is what I stand for. And I was really young. So putting my foot down, I think that I remember, just standing in my own gut and intuition, trusting myself with that. I think that's a memory that holds dear.
That's amazing. And I think we also can understand how that same spirit has also led to so many of your successes later on, and of course, which we will talk about as well as we go along. So, moving right to admissions, Abhi, once you decided to apply, what were the actions that you took, and how long did you spend on each component of the application? Be it tests, essays, networking, and the application itself.
I have a very atypical timeline, and I strongly don't recommend following this timeline. Really strongly recommend not following this timeline. So I think it was, oh my God, it feels so long back, but I think it was in 2018 end that I decided that, okay, I want to go to business school and I want to just change my surroundings right now. And I want a global exposure, and I also want to take some kind of break. I want to try entrepreneurship. And I was like, okay, let's figure this out and let's apply to business school. So this was December 2018. And I just, for personal reasons, I just wanted to change. So when 2019 started, I was like, okay, let me prepare for GMAT. And so my preparation truly began in March. I think I was really procrastinating very hard. And also I should caveat it with the fact that I was working at IFC at that time, which is International Finance Corporation. And I was part of their emerging markets VC team. And I was one of the only two people on the ground in India. And the other person was 20 years my senior. So she was effectively my boss. So not effectively, she was my boss. So she was my manager, one of my managers. So it was really hard to take our time because there was just so much going on. There would be some deal or something else. And I also was procrastinating it. So finally started preparing for GMAT in March or April. And then I gave my first attempt in August. Yeah. And I got a score that I was not super happy by because I have been perfectionist most of my life. I'm like, if I'll apply, I have to have the 99th percentile at least and stuff like that. So I kept giving it again. Though my goal was to apply in round one that year in 2019, I kept giving it again and I gave it 4 times that year.
So you first took it in August and then...
Yeah, and then I did it every month. So I did one attempt in September, October, and November. And I did apply to one college in fall, which was round one admissions in 2019. And this was Wharton. And most of the people I'd worked with IFC were Wharton. There was some history of people getting into Wharton from IFC India as well. So it seemed like, there's a good chance I could get in. And I got a consultant, and my consultant was like, with your score, I had a 720. So he was like, with a 720 GMAT, I think you could get into Wharton. And this is the kind of guy who generally doesn't say such things like my consultant. So I was like, you know what, let me apply. And I still remember feeling really bad about applying. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I should not have applied. Even when I submitted my Wharton application, I was like, I made a mistake. I should not have applied because I was such a perfectionist at that time. And I didn't even hear back for an interview. And like I said, I had only worked with Wharton people at IFC, and I knew a lot of Wharton people. And there was all kind of things working for me. And I didn't even get an interview. Maybe it could be my GMAT, maybe it could be something else, but there are people with 720 also who have gotten in. So I don't know. And so that was very demoralizing, but I was like, yeah, it's fine. It's okay. Because I also visited I had visited Wharton and I visited Stanford in 2018. I was working in the US at that time. So I'd visited these campuses. And I was like, oh, in any case, Stanford is a school with a beautiful campus. So we'll apply to Stanford, or we'll apply to Harvard, which is also a beautiful campus because I visited Harvard as well. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll apply in round 2, maybe I won't. And I was just my mental health was also really I was so stressed all the time because of GMAT, especially because I was not being able to crack GMAT, and I was not being able to my score would be 710, 720. It was just not increasing.
And what kind of preparation were you undertaking as well?
So I did every possible thing you can imagine. I did the official guides, I did the Manhattan mocks, I did every tough question on the planet. I remember I had gotten my hands on some material from this tutor guy. I don't even remember his name now because it's so long back. It was 4 years back that we're talking about. I think his name is Sandeep something. And I solved every question. So my quant was fine. English was my issue, and which was also a bit hurtful because I always thought that verbal would be good for me. Yeah, so it was just the jitters and time management, which was the issue, which was the main issue. So I started maintaining an error log. Like I still have that error log where I have 2,000, 3,000 questions that I've practiced. And like for each question, what went wrong? There's an entire Excel analysis because I was a consultant. So I've done all this stupid shit. I have like a log of every question, why, what went wrong, a drop down, like, okay, this went wrong, then an analysis on it, what kind of mistakes are happening. But I was just not being able to crack it. And I'd given it 4 times. So I decided that I would take the last 2 weeks of December off and just give GMAT again, because at that time I can actually take off from work because everybody's off during Christmas. And before that, I was not being able to take off for even like 3-4 days because of just timeline pressures on at work. So I took the last 2 weeks off of December thinking I'll give GMAT again. And I was really stressed at that time. And I was like, I just want to do anything. And as I mentioned, like I don't believe in any kind of religion. And I was not at all into things like meditation. Like for me, meditation was more like a challenge or like, yeah, stay without your phone kind of a thing. So I started my 2-week break on December 15th with like a 3-day meditation thing near my house that I found randomly online. And I did not know much about it. And I just went with an open mind because I just wanted some peace for 3 days before I started this again. And I'd spoken to somebody and they had told me, you need to start the GMAT prep from scratch. You need to do eGMAT this time and you're going to do it again. Forget everything you've done. Just do it again from scratch and start eGMAT. So I bought eGMAT after that. And I was like really in a good state after those 3 days. I started meditating every day and I restarted the eGMAT module. So I started sentence correction. I did that. I did critical reasoning. And when I was just starting reading comprehension, this was like a week into my break, I was like, I don't think I want to give GMAT again. I think I should apply to Stanford. And because I had gotten the Dhirubhai Ambani, I was a finalist for the Dhirubhai Ambani scholarship, which is this scholarship. It doesn't exist anymore, but you apply for it in May and you don't even need a GMAT to apply. And I was one of the 50 finalists for that. So you don't have to pay as well to apply. That application fee is also waived off for you. And like you get a full ride to Stanford if you end up getting into Stanford after that, because there's no guarantee you'll get into Stanford after that, but you get both. If you get into Stanford and then you got the scholarship, then you get a full ride. But my application fee was waived off. So I was like, okay, even to apply, there's no cost as well. There's literally no cost other than the cost of time. And I don't know if it was the meditation. I don't know what it was, but I ended up writing my application in like a few days, which was literally 5 days or 6 days because the deadline was round 2. And then I decided the night before the HBS deadline that I'm going to migrate that into HBS. And I literally just migrated in a day and I applied to both schools and I got in. So
you got into
schools.
both. Oh, wow. That's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. So I always give it with the caveat that nobody should follow this. In my opinion, I would never follow it if I have to go through it again. But it was a crazy story. I also applied to 2 other colleges and I did not get in there actually.
Go figure. How Stanford they work out, the others don't.
I don't know. Yeah, so that's what happened with me. I was in a very good state and it was interesting. So it's an interesting journey to business school.
For sure, for sure. And Abhi, you talked about the meditation, and maybe it was the meditation which put you in like a really nice zone. So would love to hear a little bit more about how you approached the what matters most essay, because that's the one that gives people sleepless nights. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that was the first essay that I wrote in that 5 days. And that was it. Like, I think that was the main essay. And I've even seen people, like, to give you context, like I was been speaking with my friends here at Stanford. And this one friend of mine, because you have to, I think, write 1,200 words for both the essays combined, why Stanford and what matters most. She used 1,100 words for what matters most and 100 words for why Stanford. So like, that's how important that question is. I had been reflecting a lot that year about where I come from and what motivates me. Like, as I said, I think personally, I was feeling this restlessness to go to the next stage of my life. And that was fueling my desire to go to business school as well. So I reflected quite a bit on that. And I reflected it with a partner. So one of my friends who was also thinking of applying, we would often talk about, okay, this is something happened. And I think this is something something that matters a lot to me. And then I would tell this person a lot about my upbringing and then be like, what do you think are the themes emerging? Like this is just conversation. Like it's not like I was writing something down. So it was just a very reflective year in that way. And then after I think the meditation stuff happened and I started writing my essay, I just put a bunch of stories and then I was like, okay, this theme is emerging or that theme is emerging. And then finally I went with something else entirely. But I remember the first essay that I had written and sent it to my consultant. I think this was, first week of January 2020. And he came back. He didn't even give me comments. He just responded, this is very boring. Why are you writing this? Like, so I think you have to just be at it and you have to storytell really well in it, because you may have the same stories, but even with the same stories, there are like multiple ways of telling it. Like, so for example, I had written about some experience in one of the impact essays, because this was an optional essay at that time that they had added, that tell us 3 times where you've made a personal impact or professional impact or any kind of impact that means a lot to you. And my friend, like one of my best friends, he has nothing to do with business school. He's never applied, not going to apply. But he knows me really well. So I sent him my entire Stanford application. And he read that impact essay and he was like, oh my God, you've done this work? This should be in what matters most. Why are you wasting this in an optional essay? And then he recommended that. And I think that really strengthened my essay a lot, because my essay opened with that for HBS, both HBS and Stanford. So yeah, I think storytelling is very key too for that essay.
Okay. If you could share a little bit more about your approach, Abhi, like you really shared very nicely how you spoke to people and how you shared different themes, etc. What were some of the themes that you grappled with, and how did you eventually identify what you wanted to go with?
Yeah, I think independence was a strong theme that came out of that. And I think I've seen also a lot of people write really heavy essays, breaking the glass ceilings like matters most to us and stuff like that. And I felt like that was like really heavy. Like I've seen that in a lot of essays that people just generally write. So I wanted to write something. I was like, okay, independence does matter. And like, it's also like for a lot of people, independence matters a lot, right? But what's the value behind it? Why does independence matter so much to me? And what's like the value that was also contributing to it? So I started brainstorming about that within myself. And then I wrote about my final essay was being bold, or actually courage. So I wrote courage is what matters most to me, because if I have the courage to do anything, I will make it through in life. So I just wrote courage. And I think writing about a value was so much more easier. And I feel like if anybody would read it, right, like anybody in life, it's such a widely applicable value as well. So people can resonate with the value, because yeah, somebody who's admission committee, this person grew up in Ohio, like has nothing in common with me, looks different than me, speaks different than me. But courage is something that cuts through for everybody, because if without courage, we won't be here today. So I think I went for that because I knew I wanted to establish a connection. And somebody had told me this earlier, like I'd spoken to this one person and they were like, you need to write your essay in a way that is memorable, that when they discuss about you, so this person is going to read your essay and then they're going to get together in a group on a call or something, and they're going to discuss about you. They're going to be like, I read this essay and Abhi is A, B, and C. You need to know what A, B, and C are you trying to communicate, and you need to storytell accordingly. So that's what I did. I wanted my values to come through very clearly so that they can say, she's this person, she's that person, and this is relatable. Like all of us are like that. So yeah.
That's really powerful. And Abhi, what are those couple of stories that you think really, really helped you shine in the process and be memorable, as you said, A, B, and C? That was really nice.
Yeah, I think I wrote about a lot of personal stuff and also a lot of professional stuff. So I wrote about my time growing up and like how that was like, and talking about wanting to be independent, talking about not taking no for an answer, and also pushing back against my parents a lot and giving them a very hard time. So, and then I spoke about, because I think I'm living a life right now that was unimagined by my family. I think that's the word that I would use. I've gone on to my problems right now are not something my family can relate to at all. I wrote about that. I wrote about working at Kearney, where I also against had a lot of pushback from some of the clients, some of the consultants, and how I worked with them to make things just better so that we can deliver our project. I didn't write much about IFC, actually. I didn't write about IFC in my What Matters Most to essay, if I'm remembering it correctly. But another thing I wrote, because I was very vulnerable in my essay, because I've always wanted to be so fiercely independent, there's a lot of burden on me to also act like a woman, right? There's also, you have to be feminine in some sort of ways. You have to be high EQ. And I was not that person at all. When I was starting out my career, I was like, go, 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 like deliver, deliver, deliver. How can you guys not do this in like 5 minutes? I can do this in 2 minutes. So I was like that person. And so I wrote about how hard it was for me to manage like even a team of 2 people in consulting. And I got feedback that I'm not empathetic and stuff like that. And whoever I tell this to, they're like, you wrote in your essay for Stanford that you got feedback that you're not an empathetic person. They call me crazy, but I think I was just in a zone and I just went for it. I even wrote in my HBS essay because it was the same essay. And I remember sending it one of my closest friends who was a first year at HBS at that time. And she was like, people don't write this stuff in HBS essays. You should not be writing this. You should write maybe Stanford, fine. Like that culture is different, but no, for HBS, don't write this. But I was like, no, I think I'm going to go with it. It fits because this is me. So so I think I was very vulnerable about failures as well, which I think was memorable, I'm sure. I mean, I can't say for sure, but
yeah, I mean, it worked. So we can probably say with safety for sure.
Yeah. And my interview was actually all about my essay. She went para by para. It was that I want to talk about your work, but I need to talk about your essay. And she went para by para because she had questions.
Oh, wow. Like about the specific situations you talked about in your essay. She wanted to know more about those.
Yeah, she wanted to know more about that. And she wanted to understand a lot more. So I do know like there were some things that stuck out for her for sure.
Okay. Wow. And yeah, as you rightly said, right? People don't generally tell one on themselves in the essays. And the fact that you did that definitely made you come across as somebody who is being very candid, very honest, and very authentic as well.
Yeah, but also could be a foolish move. But yeah, we never know. We don't know. We're here. It's fine.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Abhi, for detailing out the process that you went through. I think this will be super helpful for people who, while they're approaching their essays as well. And you talked a little bit about the impact essays, right? That you had some things you were talking about over there, and then you moved them over into your What Matters Most essay. So then how did you approach your impact essays as well? If you have some advice on that.
Yeah, so this was really long back. And I think the prompt was different then because I've seen much more recent essays and I think they've changed the prompt now. And that was the first year that they were doing those essays. So it was an optional essay at that time. How I approached it was I just wrote like 4 stories where I think I've made some kind of impact on a personal or a professional level. And I was like, what do people like the most? Like I literally sent it to my friends and I'm like, what do you like the most? And so one thing I wrote about was this non-for-profit that I'd worked at and the impact I created there for the volunteers and helping them out. Second was a personal level impact that I'd had for a friend, which was very personal. And I just wrote that. Third was really blanking on this, but I think it was something professional, if I remember it correctly. No, it was something I did in college. Sorry. It was something I did in college. So I'd organized an entire business plan competition and entrepreneurship and startups were unheard of at SRCC. Even though it's a business college, these things were really developed at IITs at that time because companies were coming out. People were like killing it, right, from IITs. But there was no chatter about this in SRCC, even though a lot of people wanted to know more. And Oyo and Uber, like all these companies were coming to a college. And I remember Ritesh Agarwal coming as like a 20-year-old to our college. And I led that competition. And that was another thing that I wrote about.
So you didn't write about any professional achievements at all in your impact essays?
When you don't have them, you can't write about them.
Awesome. Love the humor as well. And I guess in terms of essays, just one more essay which I wanted to talk about was the Why Stanford essay. How did you approach that and what advice do you have for that?
Yeah, so how I approached that essay was that, so I had like my overarching goal about what I wanted to do. So I wrote about helping out small businesses and creating some kind of platform that small businesses can grow. And that's actually something that I want to do now as well. Like I'm working on that still, but in a very different way, but I'm still working in that same thing. Like that's what I wanted to do. I wrote about to get there, and to do that, I need to work on X, Y, and Z. And I think Stanford is the best school for fulfilling X, Y, and Z. And that's exactly what I wrote.
Okay. And in terms of the research for that, how did you approach your research? Did you speak to a bunch of people? Did you attend a bunch of events? How did you approach it?
So as I mentioned, I had actually visited Stanford on campus because I was in the US for some time and I had come to San Francisco for some work. So I came to Stanford for a day, and I highly recommend to anybody whose circumstances allow this to, because it really gives you a chance to see if the school is for you or not. Because I didn't even know about Stanford till that time. And Stanford was never on my radar. I was always like, yeah, we'll go to Howard because that's the school we heard about growing up. And when I came to Stanford, I was like, this is the place I want to go to. And this is the place that, even when I was on campus, I remember like I didn't even see the dorms. I didn't even see it because it's not like I'm going to go here or I'm going to get admitted here, because the admission rate is so low. And like, I think I talked myself down. And I still remember during the drive from Palo Alto to SF, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to apply to Stanford because it was such a beautiful sunset and I love California. So visit campus for sure if you can. And during that campus visit, like typically they make you sit in a class. And I sat in this, like one of the most legendary classes at Stanford, which is the finance class that the most prolific professor out of GSB, which is Jack McDonald. Like there's an entire dorm named after him. That's where I lived last year. Like that's how prolific he is. He's best friends with Warren Buffett, like all that. So he used to teach that class and he died 3-4 years back. So now the class is still taught, but it's like it's the class for people who want to do investing. And one of the alums was visiting in the class that I attended, which was this guy who manages like a multi-billion-dollar fund in New York, graduated from GSB a few years back, and he held the entire lecture. He talked to people how he thinks about investing. And that was like the best class I attended out of all my business school visits. And it really stood out to me. And I was like, okay, this is a great school. It was also because I saw the best class. I think I got weirdly lucky in picking that up. But yeah, it was such a great class. And I was just blown away that, wow, like the school is so amazing, and the way they teach about things, and also his personal story, his way of admitting failures. His EQ was so high in the room that even after being in investing, which I don't mean in disrespect, but most investing people aren't white men in investing have like a reputation here. So, but this guy wasn't like that. So it was quite amazing for me. So I wrote about visiting that class and how that really stood out to me very strongly. I did speak to somebody as well who sort of pivoted into operating roles. So I also wrote about that. And I had spoken to 1 or 2 people who went to Stanford, though I know it's hard to get a hold of people who go to Stanford from India. So I did speak to one person like that. And that was the research. Yeah, that was it. I didn't do anything else on the website. I did look at the courses that could be interesting. And I did see professors who could be interesting. And I wrote about a professor who has this philosophy of how he infuses the ability to accept failure and also the ability to innovate in like a very in a way that even when it's super difficult. So I wrote about the ability to just say, I don't know, even if you don't say, right, as a leader, that you just don't know this. So I wrote about that too. So I researched on the professor.
That's a lot of ground to cover in 5 days. Really, really impressive.
I wasn't that much. I mean, I also had visited Stanford, which I think was like the biggest thing.
That's super helpful. And Abhi, you talked about your goals being about contributing to small businesses, right? So I was also wondering how you went about developing the clarity about what you wanted to do, about your career vision, because that's something I find people struggling with a lot as well.
Oh, yeah, that's such a great and a tough question because I have no idea. But I think I was quite sure that I wanted to try out operating when I was applying, because I applied at IFC and I got in at IFC, and then I deferred and did something else. I was quite sure I wanted to do operating. I think what sector do I want to do operating in? That was the bigger question. What sector do I want to do it? Is it climate? Is it healthcare? Is it something else? And some things that were standing out was really my work in SMB tech, which is small businesses tech, during my time at IFC. And because I'd invested in a bunch of B2B companies that help small businesses physicist, and I really like that space. And I think that there is a lot to do in that space. And also healthcare was another one. And I did end up doing something in healthcare by deferring, and I'm still really interested in healthcare. Like I've been really into healthcare the past 2 years at GSB as well. I think that is how I thought about it, because for me, it was like, okay, what am I liking the most? Because the benefit of being an investor is that you see a lot of different companies and you see a lot of different sectors. So you can pick and choose what is really sticking with you. And that's what stuck with me the most. And I thought that that's like my grand vision, because another tip I would give is, I think a lot of people talk about short-term goals, long-term goals here. And somebody had said this to me, this one person I'd spoken to about GSB, who I even mentioned in my essay. She was like, your classmates that you will gravitate towards or you will respect at Stanford will be people who are starting their own funds, not people who are just looking to get a job at Lightspeed. That's the mindset that people have here. And you have to match that mindset and have that confidence in yourself that you can do that. That makes for a good essay, or like that makes for a good candidate for GSB. Yeah, so that really struck with me. So having a grand vision is very important when it comes to Stanford or even HBS, I think.
Super helpful. Thanks for sharing that, Abhi. And Abhi, the Stanford interview process is also a little different in that it may, on the face of it, appear to be just like a simple alarm interview. But the level of depth that one gets into is very different from the other interviews. So if you could just talk about how you prepared for it and any advice you have for people to excel in it.
My interview was with an alum, and she did not have anything other than my CV. So she did not have my essays. And I think what Stanford is trying to test is they're trying to see the person that you come across in the essay is the same person you come across in person. So what the interviewer has to do is, like, she meets you and then she has to answer a bunch of questions about you. Like, what do you think motivates her? Or what do you think? Stuff like this. First thing I would say is, like, you can use the similar stories that you've already said in your essay. It's not like you need to reinvent the wheel. The second thing I would say is, what I did was I just put together like a bunch of stories. It can be where I failed, or it can be where I had to convince somebody, or it can be my proudest achievement. And like sometimes they were also overlapping with each other quite a bit. So I just prepared 6 stories, and so that I can mold them as the question that would be posed to me. So for example, if like she asked me, what's your proudest experience? Like I can use something where I convinced a group of people who didn't like me initially, because it made me really proud of myself. So like that's how I went about doing it.
Right. That's helpful. And how did you prepare your anecdotes? Like, did you do anything specific? Because there's a lot of depth that they get into.
I think I just wrote it down because I'm a write down kind of a person. Like I write everything down. So I did write down how I would speak about it in STAR format, which is like the situation, task, action, result format. And I just thought about like what kind of experiences could I use from mostly my professional life and also some from personal, but mostly professional life, about some of these questions like that could possibly come. That's what I did. I did do like a mock or two with my consultant. That was another thing that I did.
Okay. And you mentioned that you also interviewed with HBS. So what advice do you have for candidates to prepare for that?
HBS is like a completely different interview process. HBS is a 30-minute interview by the clock. They're very punctual and they ask you 30 questions in that 30 minutes. So what they're trying to test is, can you survive in the case-based method? They already love you, like, because they have gotten you here for the interview, but now they're testing, like, are some of the things that you wrote in the essay actually true? And like, when they grill you, like, can you answer them on the moment? And the second thing is, can you survive the case-based method and say something really opinionated and something really strong in just a minute? So it's the opposite of Stanford almost. And the adcom takes the interview. So they'd have your essay printed out in front of you and they're taking notes like relentlessly as you're speaking as well. And I think I personally like that way of interviewing more than Stanford. I don't know why, but I did. And my advice would be to practice being very succinct. Just say things in like a minute, or when somebody asks you a question, because they would interrupt you if you're taking more than that. They have 30 questions to get through. They've prepared it. So they will cut you off.
Yeah, makes sense. And apart from your application, since like it's not a blind interview like Stanford, apart from the application, do you have any other recommendations for people? to prepare for the HBS interview?
Read your CV 30 times. Anything you've written in it, they will ask you. Anything you've written in any essay, any CV. And they will ask you the most trivial things as well to just see how you hold under pressure, because that's like a HBS thing.
Do you remember what they asked you?
I think I was not asked something very weird or random. I would say random. Like I was asked a lot of hard questions, but I think for my friend, he had written something in his CV in hobbies. Like he had a hobbies thing. It's like the bottommost line. Nobody really reads it or nobody really says anything, right, about that. And I think he wrote Maratha mythology or something like that. And so the person who was interviewing him, and this is like, I think a white woman from the Midwest here in the US. So she picked that up and said something about that. And she wanted to pressure test how he would respond. Like she just made casual conversation about it. And he was like, oh my God, why is this person who has no background on the Maratha history asking me this? Like he is at HBS now, but I think like, so they're testing if like what you said is actually who you are, and testing also if you can handle that pressure. So like they will say the most randomest things. Like for example, another anecdote of that is somebody worked at some XYZ place and there was something in the news about that XYZ place on that day. The interviewer just said, oh, I saw this in the news. Like, what do you think about this? And this person had not seen the news. This person was like, I don't know what she's talking about. So, but this person still handled it with grace and everything. So they did make it. But they would say stuff like this. You have to know every word on your CV. I wrote about investing in Sri Lanka, for example. Like I should know, why does Sri Lanka make for a good investment, for example? Or like, what are the top companies there? If a classmate at HBS comes to me about Sri Lanka, I can speak to them and give them 3 points about Sri Lanka. So yeah.
Very clear. Thank you, Abhi, for sharing that. So I also want to make sure we get to talk about GSB and your experience here. So Abhi, for us to get a sense, what are some of the flagship events through the year at the GSB?
Can you elaborate by what you mean by the events?
The major events that are like a go-to for most people, if there are any such events at the GSB.
I think it's hard for me to say flagship events because so much happens on our campus. Every day, it's almost ridiculous, like because somebody was recently visiting and I told them I live a week in a day. Like that's how much stuff we do in a day. Even it's just so much happens. I think events that do stand out, like I think which a lot of people have also seen on Stanford's YouTube, is like View from the Top, for example, because a lot of people do go for that. Yeah, and it's recorded and stuff. So it's like it's done on a very large scale, and like some really inspiring people came. And that's how I also got introduced to Stanford, because I remember the Vinod Khosla interview, and Vinod Khosla spoke about how he got into Stanford on his second or third try. And I was like, okay, maybe I can also have the same strategy. I'm not better than Vinod Khosla right now. So that's how I thought about it. I think that's a big event that a lot of people from school go to, for sure. Then some ridiculous events are coming to mind, which are like very social oriented.
Definitely, you can mention those as well, the social events, because those are very relevant also.
For example, in 10 days, I'm going to go to Vegas just for a night on Tuesday. So there is this thing at GSB called FOAM, which stands for Friends of R.J. Miller. And R.J. Miller was a dean at the GSB a lot of years back. So they set up this committee which throws a party every Tuesday, and you prepay for that party for 2 years. And there are different themes, like it's costume parties. Like, so for example, it's not like everybody's dressing up really polished. It's like random themes. Like it's the most random theme party. And every Tuesday this happens. And every year there is one FOAM that happens in Vegas. So it's essentially like you dress up in 70s costume with like 400 of your classmates and also 400 another year. And you take the flight to Vegas. So you take the 7 p.m. flight to Vegas, you land there, you get dinner in that 70s costume, then you party all night in the 70s costume, and you take the 6 a.m. flight back, like you just came back from, I don't know, somewhere. If people go to Vegas, they're like going to a friend's house here. So that is a flagship event that like 700 people attend because it's huge, and every alum knows that Vegas FOAM is a thing. Even the airport security knows that this has been happening for 20 years.
Wow, insane.
Yeah, the San Jose airport security, like I was standing in line for Chick-fil-A in San Jose, and like this guy is looking at all of us and he's like, what is happening? Why are these kids dressed up in like weird as disco costumes. And like the airport security woman goes like, no, these are like Stanford GSB students. They come every year. We've seen it for years. So it's like a very big flagship thing. I think other than that, another thing that most of the class comes for together is talk, which is, I think, my favorite thing here at GSB, which is every week, two people give a talk, which is like they just talk about their life and people open up about things that are very, very personal to them, like dealing with their family, parents' divorces, assault, and really personal stuff. And so you have to apply for a lottery, and you like every week, two people do that on Wednesday. And I think it reinforces that culture of GSB of like being very vulnerable, transparent, and really being reflective. And that's a very beautiful tradition because like you're getting to hear about someone's life in such a personal format and people are being very honest there. So that for that as well, and the entire class comes together essentially because your friend would be doing this and it's like a big deal. Like you're cheering somebody on before they give the talk. There's an introduction for them, and typically that's done by a family friend or your friend from GSB. Like I've given an introduction for one of my friends. It's like really, really a very beautiful ritual. So that's another big thing that happens every week at GSB.
Sounds incredible. Absolutely giving me goosebumps even thinking about something like that.
Yeah, we do Vegas on Tuesday, talk on Wednesday. So it is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I can see what you meant by we live a week in one day.
We do live a week in one day. It's crazy, the kind of stuff that happens. And then there are like academic stuffs also like that happens, that's big events. But I think things that stand out are like this.
And Abhi, how would you describe the unique identity of Stanford? You got through HBS as well, and you chose Stanford. So clearly there's something that really stood out for you.
I think people are very reflective here. People are very, like, the culture forces you to reflect a lot on who are you, what kind of values do you come from. I think the culture reinforces that through even classes. I don't know if you've heard about Touchy, which is Interpersonal Dynamics. It's a very popular class here. So I took that last quarter. It's so funny. People cry every week. It's just weird. Like you never hear that in any other school. Like people are crying every week in class. It's a thing. So I think it's a very reflective school. Like people are very, very reflective here and they know their strengths, they know their weaknesses. Even if they're working on it, like they know what they need to work on for sure. And very entrepreneurial, may I add. Like the general vibe is very hustling, chaotic. It's not like there's a path. Hardly anybody is pursuing consulting. There's a very small section of our class pursuing consulting. I don't know anybody doing investment banking because people are like, let's just go and work at a private equity fund if you want to do investing. There are a lot of people without jobs even now. I mean, I'm not recruiting as well. So to give you a stat, like 60% of our class found their summer internships in April and May, and the internships start in June. So I was one of them. That's how last minute and entrepreneurial and like the hustle mindset is very ingrained here. So it's not typical for other colleges, is what I've heard.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Abhi. And Abhi, in what ways does the Bay Area location enhance the experience?
I think it definitely really helps if you want to be an entrepreneur, do VC, or even do like a bunch of other things because it's sort of a hub. A lot of people live here in Palo Alto. If you want to meet an investor, you just go out for a walk with them. It's so chill. I think it definitely really enhances in that way. But we did move to a Zoom world. Like I understand that even if somebody is, sitting in Northwestern, they can do a Zoom with somebody here because people have just embraced that even more. But it's like super nice. You can just grab coffee with people. You can just be like, oh, let's meet up. It's very easy to approach people and be like, I need 30 minutes of your time. I'll come down to your office. There is some kind of power in it. I don't have to take a flight. I just have to drive for 20, 30 minutes and I'll be there.
Absolutely. And do people own cars here, or let's say, how do you commute?
In the first year, so our dorms and campus is right next to each other. It's literally a 2-minute walk, not even a 2-minute walk, I would say, like 2-3 minute walk. And everybody else in the Stanford University campus is very envious of that. And the campus is beautiful. It's like a beautiful campus. In second year, most people move out and sort of live around campus. I'm still living on campus, but I'm also living near the law school. So it's now a 10-15 minute walk for me. But I did get a car because I wanted to learn how to drive because it's so crucial to know how to drive if you're in California, because the public transportation is not that great and everybody drives. And the more you go into the heartland of US as well, like you need to know how to drive because there's not much public transportation. And like unless you're in New York, you don't drive in New York. But other than that, even in California, you need to know how to drive because Ubers are super expensive. So people carpool, like a lot of people have cars now. I bought a car to learn how to drive. So I bought a car without knowing how to drive. So it was chaotic.
Yeah, it's scary at times, right? With the speed at which people are going.
No, it's actually California rules are very strict. If you get a license in California, like that means something. It doesn't just mean you got a license. The rules and everything are followed very strictly here. So that's pretty good.
Nice. Yeah, it's very helpful to have a car in the US and test to that for sure. And Abhi, could you speak a little bit about the activities that you've been involved in, right? Like you're co-heading two clubs, which is really impressive. The Women in Management Club, the Wellness Club. Can you speak a little bit about what it entails to be leading those clubs? What are some of the major activities you have?
Yeah, so Women in Management is the largest club on campus, and we have around 500, 600 people in our club across the two classes. I'm one of the three co-presidents at WIM. We call it WIM. So what we do at WIM is building the community. Second is professional development. And third is building just a very inclusive environment and with all kinds of intersectionalities and also advocacy with the academics like department and all of that. So I'm heading the third piece, which is building an inclusive environment, addressing issues that are generally taboo topics or things we don't speak about, and also doing a lot of advocacy stuff like how can we advance gender in the classroom, how can we advance gender outside of the classroom. So I'm heading that, and we also have a board of 9 people. So I work with 3 other of my classmates who are also on the board, and I'm leading this entire thing. But if I want to do other stuff as well, I can do it. And organizing events, like calling really inspirational speakers who can talk about those subjects. So that's also a big thing that we do.
Okay. And how frequently do you organize events with WIM? Is it like on a weekly basis or how does it work?
WIM is the most active club on campus. So we do a lot. I think in a personal capacity, I don't do something every week, but something or the other is happening at least once every week or once every 2 weeks. Like we're doing something or the other. WIM is super active. It's like the most active club on campus. So yeah.
Okay, very cool. And did you participate in elections to become co-president?
Not technically elections, it's like application based, and then they decide who they want as like a co-president and stuff like that, and then we divide the committees amongst ourselves. But there is an election as well, like after the application stuff has happened, they just do an election. Nobody is going to oppose or anything, but you have to vote or something like that. So but there are other clubs that have elections. WIM was application based for us, and then there was like a courtesy election that these are your, because you're running unopposed. So yeah.
Understood. And how about the Wellness Club? Could you speak a little bit about that also?
I think Wellness Club for me was very personal. I want to go deeper into contemplative practices, and I'm figuring all of that out for myself. So that's how I got involved in it. Like there are a bunch of us who are leading it, and I am involved in doing this series with one of our professors who's also runs this huge fund here in the US called Alpine. So his name is Graham Weaver. He's also a TikTok sensation here, by the way. Like he speaks about motivation and like discipline, habit building. How do you ace things in your career? Like he started his own fund right out of business school, and that's one of the largest private equity funds. So I organized this series with him where he talks about what things are working for him, what's not. So like we did one last quarter called What Should I Do With My Life? Because a lot of people are struggling with that question. And then I did one on habits, like how do you develop good habits? And we've done similar stuff before, like how do you get out of your own way? How do you conquer limiting beliefs? Because that stuff he teaches into a lot of people. So just to increase that access of his teachings and the access to him is amazing. So I collaborate with him to facilitate those kind of events.
They sound amazing. I feel like anybody could benefit from them, not just the GSB students.
Yeah, well, he's on TikTok. So
I hope he's on Instagram as well. We don't have access to TikTok here in India. I would love to check him out.
Yeah.
Okay, super. And Abhi, you were talking about the Touchy course, which you took recently, right? Would love to hear a little bit more about your experience taking it?
Oh yeah, Touchy was intense. Touchy was a great course. I think it's the best class I've taken at GSB for sure. And it almost doesn't feel like a class because I think there's just so much personal stuff going on. And to give context, like how Touchy works is that, so I was in the Monday section. So like there's a 6-hour block on Monday. So starting from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. you're in class. It first starts with some lecture component with the professor. And then we start this thing called T group because we're divided in groups of like 12 with 2 facilitators. And there's literally no agenda. You just talk. Like there is no agenda. And people come with a lot of thinking about what are some kind of things that they want to experiment about interpersonal relationships. What are some things that you need to work on? So people have goals ranging from trying to show more range of emotions or be more vulnerable, handle conflict, stuff like this, or like trust themselves more when something is coming up for them. So you come with a set of goals to work on it, and then things come up and you do talk a lot. But it's a great class. I think it's one of the most quintessential experiences here at the GSB.
Understood. And is there something you would like to share that you discovered about yourself that's really meaningful from participating in that course?
I think it was very reflective for me in the way I was very experimentative in the course. I tried to do things that generally I don't do to see how that would land on people. So that was a good learning to understand because it's a very experimentative environment. So people do things that they generally won't do to check like, how is this landing on you? And I think another big learning was how do you communicate when somebody has pissed you off? So things like first leading with I feel, and that X can't be I feel like this. You have to say I feel exhausted with you right now. So being vulnerable with that. And I think it really helps your personal relationships, especially with people. Like I don't know how much professional applicability would be when this happens, but personal relationships, it helps a lot. Like just saying that very powerfully and making it about that feeling rather than crossing the net. It's a very touchy-feely term called crossing the net, which is where you are assuming that somebody is doing something and saying that like you're doing this and it's pissing me off, rather than say that I feel angry that this happened. So reframing that communication is something that touchy-feely really teaches you, and how to raise conflict. And so that was a very big learning for me.
Superb. And speaking a little more generally about academics, Abhi, who are the star professors and what are the most popular courses? You've talked about one or two already. If you could speak about some of the others, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I think Touchy is the most popular course for sure. And there are a lot of sections that happen. So a lot of people do go through it. And it's like an entire rite of passage for a lot of people. Then popular professors and popular courses. So there's this one class that's this quarter called Entrepreneurship and VC. It's taught by Scott Kapoor and Eric Schmidt. So Eric Schmidt is the guy who started Google. Scott Kapoor is like biggest guy at Andreessen Horowitz, which is like the best VC fund ever. And they talk about what entails like when you start a business and when you're looking at it as a VC. So that's very popular class. Then the second popular class is Managing Growing Enterprises. And then there are multiple professors who teach this. So Graham Weaver, who I spoke about, is one of the professors who teaches it. And that's about when you are growing a company from 10 to 100, like what are the kind of things that you will encounter and like how do you go about managing that? And there are very prolific different investors who are doing it. So Graham is one of them. Dave Dotson is one of them. These people who've run like huge companies or people who've operated like private equity funds. These are the kind of people who are teaching it. So this is a very popular class again. Then there's another class that I'm in this quarter called Paths to Power, which is taught by Professor Jeffrey Pfeiffer. It's a very popular class again. It's actually sort of controversial as well because they talk about how do you build your own power and succeed at no matter what. And I think it's a very important class for anybody who's been a minority group ever in their life, women or like people of color or even people who come from really small towns or like come from, that entire baggage of just not being the majority in a group. So I think it's a great class for those people on understanding like how do you be shameless? How do you be bold in asking for help? How do you network? How do you seek mentors? So that's a very powerful class I'm in this quarter that I have been really, really enjoying. Yeah. And then I spoke about the investing class. That's really big as well. And there is Winning Writing, which is taught by this guy who used to be an editor at New York Times. He teaches how do you do powerful writing, essentially persuasive and powerful writing. So that's one of the very popular classes as well. And then there are a lot more. Like I can continue like so many courses. So it's so sad that I can't take everything. But yeah, there are a lot of amazing courses here at GSB.
Amazing. That's really helpful. Thanks, Abhi. And Abhi, before we move to recruiting, if you could share a little bit about what's been your biggest challenge at GSB thus far?
Oh, managing time. I'm one person and there are like 100 things to do here. So being very goal oriented, being like, okay, this is what I want out of my GSB experience. Does this actually contribute to it? Like if you come with not knowing why you've come to business school, you're going to struggle really hard throughout business school. Like I think everybody struggles in the first quarter because it's a shock to the system at how hectic it is here. But I think time management, it has been a challenge. And also slightly more than time management would be just reinforcing that, okay, no, these are my goals. This is what I'm going after. So I think in the first quarter, I was like all over the place. And then somehow I had to like, no, these are my goals and I have to do this because so much interesting stuff is happening. You want to hear everyone. People, they're like the best people here, the top percentile people of the world, right? So you want to do everything, but it's just not possible, sadly.
Very true. And Abhi, could you speak a little bit about the recruiting journey you've had for your internship? And not sure if you've done any recruiting for full time. Would love to hear a little bit about that.
So I have not done any recruiting for full time and I can't speak to that. And for internships, I wanted stuff was in digital healthcare with a focus on mental health. Most of the companies that I was going after were like not recruiting or did not have an internship program. So I started reaching out to them, reaching out to alums or reaching out to people who work there to like understand more about their companies and see if they're hiring, if they're an intern could work out. And I was also doing some amount of research on working on my own thing, which would be focused on mental health for adolescents and young adults. And as part of that research, and I had gotten a grant for this and I was working on that. And I met this one investor who's also a professor, who was a lecturer here at GSB. Like she is a lecturer for a class. And I went out for like some kind of lunch with her. And I told her I'm doing this research and I'm like very interested in this and I have a background in women's health. And she's like, I just invested in a company that is trying to do the same exact thing. And I think your background in women's health would benefit them a lot because they're also thinking about women's health. So I got connected with the founders and that was literally it. That's it. That was conversation and then more going deeper into what the internship looked like and all of that. So that's how I got my internship. But I was also like speaking with a bunch of other companies and like just seeing if that could also work out. But like this is what I ended up going with. And I also wanted to be in New York. That also worked out because I lived in New York over the summer.
Okay, very cool. And this company, it's not one of the major tech companies because there's a myth or a belief that international students can't really work with startups. Would you be able to shed any light to dispel that myth?
Yeah, I didn't work in a big company. I didn't do big tech at all. So I knew I wanted to do a smaller startup. I do see pros and cons for both. I think there are pros and cons for both, but I didn't do it. So I actually don't know.
And do you know if people are able to obtain full-time opportunities as well at smaller tech companies? Is that something you've seen?
I won't say that it is a very smooth sailing ride, that everybody is coming here, like hugging you and being like, here, take this green card from me. No, definitely not. You have to prove your worth. You have to say that, this is my background. I think I can really add value. And some people will agree and some will not, but then in the end, it'll work out. So I do know people like who've gone on to do that, even for like seed stage companies and like have made it work. It's because like they just proved that they would add a lot of value. So I think that is what becomes key. But some people are like, yeah, we don't even want to talk because we don't do this. If you really want that company, you can push back. Like if you really want something, you will knock on those doors and they will open, is my belief, because I've seen that happening around me.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else about the GSP that you would want to share with international students specifically?
I think with internationals, I would say there's typically like a lot of myths around GSB. Like it's hard to get in. Like you have to do something very out of the box to go to GSB. Like they don't take typical profiles. I feel like I don't think that's the case because I do see a lot of people who come from a lot of traditional background here as well. And I think I also came from a traditional background, like which is consulting and investing. So when I got in, I was just done consulting and investing, and there was no history of anybody even getting an interview at GSB. Somebody had gotten an interview at HBS like 3 years before I applied from India, and there was no history of anybody getting into GSB even globally that I knew of. Like it was like unheard of. So I would say if you really want to do it, you should definitely try it and don't say that, oh no, I'm not going to get in, so I should not apply. So that would be my 2 cents, because I could have easily done that too.
Right. And you applied in round two. So you're also, in a way, dispelling that myth, because overrepresented candidate pool applying in round two and making it.
Yeah, I was in a very overrepresented candidate pool. Even in my HBS interview, that came up actually, because it's taken by AdCom, and they were like, they didn't say this explicitly, but I realized after the interview that this is what they were trying to ask me, because they have already admitted people from Axel, Sequoia, and all these top VC funds in round one. What kind of a different perspective am I getting? Because everybody comes with a very unique perspective here. Everybody's a snowflake here. So you have to get a unique perspective in a HBS class or a Stanford class, and that's what they value a lot. So you have to really work on what's the unique perspective you're adding, and it can be through any kind of background. There are a lot of people who just come after 4 years of consulting, 3 years of consulting here, a lot of people, but they're mostly Americans, but a lot of people who are just here after 3-4 years of consulting.
Understood. And Abhi, so what is the unique perspective that you feel you've been bringing? Is it the small business experience? Is it something else?
I was very authentic about how I grew up, and how that has fueled a lot of desire of how I've worked, and also things I need to work on, and things also inspire me in the future, what would I want to do. So I think that was definitely a unique perspective, and also the ability to see the everyday mundane experiences of investing and consulting, but in a different way. And as I'd said, in investing, for example, I didn't write about this in my essay, but I did become one of the 2 people only on the ground, and I got to do a lot of deals as part of that. My team was actually 4 people, and people end up leaving or shifting teams. And I was the only person essentially managing deals. And so I got to do a lot as part of that. I never said no to that opportunity. I just kept going and going. So I think that was also, that really added to my confidence and added to my overall story, though I didn't mention it anywhere actually, but yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool what you just shared. And Abhi, before we bring this to a completion, right? Do you have any final advice for prospective applicants or incoming MBA students who are looking to pursue their MBA?
I think my advice would be, already, don't sell yourself short. It would be if you've not seen anybody get into a specific school from your background, but you still really like that school, apply and try if your circumstances allow, and just follow that. Yeah, I think I am glad that I did. I tried. So yeah. And also people are really trying to get to know you. So it doesn't have to just be about brands on your CV. It can be anything about you that you've overcome. So yeah.
Super awesome. Thank you so much, Abhi. I really appreciate you taking the time, that too on a Saturday morning, to do this. Really, really thank you.
Of course. And thank you so much for staying up so late.
It's absolutely my pleasure. As you rightly said, right? It's sometimes hard to get hold of Stanford students. I didn't want to miss the opportunity.